so that although I could not see her veiled face, I guessed that her eyes must be fixed on the sky above the mountain top. I was certain also that she was concentrating her fearful will upon an unknown object, for her whole frame quivered like a reed shaken in the wind. It was a very strange morning, cold and clear, yet curiously still, and with a heaviness in the air such as precedes a great fall of snow, although for much snow the season was yet too early. Once or twice, too, in that utter calm, I thought that I felt everything shudder. Not the ordinary trembling of earthquake, however, for the shuddering seemed to be of the atmosphere quite as much as of the land. It was as though all nature around us were a living creature which is very much afraid. Following Ayesha's earnest gaze, I perceived that thick, smoky clouds were gathering one by one in the clear sky above the peak, and that they were edged, each of them, with a fiery rim. Watching these fantastic and ominous clouds, I ventured to say to her that it looked as though the weather would change. Not a very original remark, but one which the circumstances suggested. "Aye," she answered, "ere night the weather will be wilder even than my heart. No longer shall they cry for water in Kaloon. Mount, Holly, mount. The advance begins." And unaided she sprang to the saddle of the mare that Oros brought her. Then in the midst of the 5,000 horsemen we moved down upon the ford. As we reached its brink I noted that the two divisions of tribesmen were already entering the stream half a mile to the right and left of us. Of what befell them I can tell nothing from observation, although I learned later that they forced it after great slaughter on both sides. In front of us was gathered the main body of the Khania's army, massed by regiments upon the further bank, while hundreds of picked men stood up to their middles in the water, waiting to spear or hamstring our horses as we advanced. Now, uttering their wild whistling cry, our leading companies dashed into the river, leaving us upon the bank, and soon were engaged hotly with the footmen in mid-stream. While this fray went on, Oros came to Ayesha, told her a spy had reported that Leo, bound in a two-wheeled carriage and accompanied by Atene, Simbri, and a guard, had passed through the enemy's camp at night, galloping furiously towards Kaloon. "Spare thy words, I know it," she answered, and he fell back behind her. Our squadrons gained the bank, having destroyed most of the men in the water, but as they set foot upon it, the enemy charged them and drove them back with loss. Thrice they returned to the attack, and thrice were repulsed in this fashion. At length Ayesha grew impatient. "They need a leader, and I will give them one," she said. "Come with me, my Holly," and, followed by the main body of the horsemen, she rode a little way into the river, and there waited until the shattered troops had fallen back upon us. Oros whispered to me, "It is madness. The Hesea will be slain." "Thinkest thou so?" I answered. "More like that we shall be slain," a saying at which he smiled a little more than usual and shrugged his shoulders, since, for all his soft ways, Oros was a brave man. Also I believe that he spoke to try me, knowing that his mistress would take no harm. Ayesha held up her hand, in which there was no weapon, and waved it forwards. A great cheer answered that signal to advance, and in the midst of it this frail white-robed woman spoke to her horse so that it plunged deep into the water. 2 minutes later, and spears and arrows were flying about us so thickly that they seemed to darken the sky. I saw men and horses fall to right and left, but nothing touched me or the white robes that floated a yard or two ahead. 5 minutes, and we were gaining the further bank, and there the worst fight began. It was fierce indeed, yet never an inch did the white robes give back, and where they went men would follow them or fall. We were up the bank, and the enemy was packed about us, but through them we passed slowly, like a boat through an adverse sea that buffets but cannot stay it. Yes, further and further, till at last the lines ahead grew thin as the living wedge of horsemen forced its path between them, grew thin, broke, and vanished. We had passed through the heart of the host, and leaving the tribesmen who followed to deal with its flying fragments, rode on 1/2 mile or so and mustered. Many were dead, and more were hurt, but the command was issued that all sore wounded men should fall out and give their horses to replace those that had been killed. This was done, and presently we moved on, 3,000 of us now, not more, heading for Kaloon. The trot grew to a canter, and the canter to a gallop, as we rushed forward across that endless plain, till at midday, or a little after, for this route was far shorter than that taken by Leo and myself in our devious flight from Rassen and his death hounds, we dimly saw the city of Kaloon set upon its hill. Now a halt was ordered, for here was a reservoir in which was still some water, whereof the horses drank, while the men ate of the food they carried with them, dried meat and barley meal. Here, too, more spies met us, who said that the great army of Atene was posted guarding the city bridges, and that to attack it with our little force would mean destruction. But Ayesha took no heed of their words. Indeed, she scarcely seemed to hear them. Only she ordered that all wearied horses should be abandoned, and fresh ones mounted. Forward again for hour after hour in perfect silence, save for the thunder of our horses' hoofs. No word spoke Ayesha, nor did her wild escort speak. Only from time to time they looked over their shoulders and pointed with their red spears at the red sky behind. I looked also, nor shall I forget its aspect. The dreadful fire-edged clouds had grown and gathered, so that beneath their shadows the plain lay almost black. They marched above us like an army in the heavens, while from time to time vaporous points shot forward, thin like swords, or massed like charging horse. Under them a vast stillness reigned. It was as though the earth lay dead beneath their pall. Kaloon, lit in a lurid light, grew nearer. The pickets of the foe flew homeward before us, shaking their javelins, and their mocking laughter reached us in hollow echoes. Now we saw the vast array, posted rank on rank, with silken banners drooping in that stirless air, flanked and screened by glittering regiments of horse. An embassy approached us, and at the signal of Ayesha's uplifted arm we halted. It was headed by a lord of the court whose face I knew. He pulled rein and spoke boldly. "Listen, Hes, to the words of Atene. Ere now the stranger lord, thy darling, is prisoner in her palace. Advance, and we destroy thee and thy little band. But if by any miracle thou shouldst conquer, then he dies. Get thee gone to thy mountain fastness, and the Khania gives thee peace, and thy people their lives. What answer to the words of the Khania?" Ayesha whispered to Oros, who called aloud, "There is no answer. Go if ye love life, for death draws near to you." So they went fast as their swift steeds would carry them, but for a little while Ayesha still sat lost in thought. Presently she turned, and through her thin veil I saw that her face was white and terrible, and that the eyes in it glowed like those of a lioness at night.